sessions this morning, August 6th, 2025. Do I need to repeat anything? We're okay. Okay, let's start out with Clark County Community Services. So Michael and team, please come forward. Good morning. Just go ahead and get started.
Good morning, Council. Michael Torres, Program Manager at Clark County Community Services. Thank you for having us here. I do want to say that the Chair and the Vice Chair of the Community Action Advisory Board, Rob Perkins and Melanie Green, were not able to be here. They did want to be here, but they had other commitments, so they just wanted to express, just their desire to be here. Next to me is Kayla Williams and Abby Molloy, Program Coordinators. We're going to be going through this work session that you requested regarding the request for application process for homeless crisis response and community action, and also a brief summary of the CAB. And I'll pass it to Abby.
Thank you, Michael. We can go to the next slide. All right, so based on the request during the June 3rd council meeting, we'll be providing an overview today of, like Michael said, the Community Action Program and Homeless Crisis Response System request for application process, as well as the Community Action Advisory Board and its role in this request for application. Next slide. To begin, we'll start with an overview of the request for application process. Next slide.
So this is about a 50,000-foot level look at what the basic process is, and it really parallels our public solicitation process in general. So for example, it very much mirrors, Councilor Young, what you experienced with the Urban County Policy Board. It mirrors most solicitations that we do. So we have, generally there is a legislation, it could be federal, it could be state, whatever origin, that creates a funding source with a specific purpose and requirements. Part of the requirements is generally formation of a plan. And with that funding source, when we do the plan that we're tasked with, we solicit community input, stakeholder involvement for whatever the purpose of the fund is, including providers besides community. And we always include also elected officials. So as an example, with the 5-year local plan, we have participants from the Ending Community Homelessness Organization, ECHO, participating, Councilor Young, Councilor Stover, Councilor Ferrer for Battleground. Out of that plan, whatever plan comes out, staff puts together a public solicitation that reflects the requirements that are coming from the legislation and whatever governing body that is, and the plan that was created. From that solicitation, proposals are received and they go to some form of advisory board review. That board, even though it's a community-based advisory board, it generally contains elected officials in some capacity. And out of the recommendations, that advisory board will take the proposals, they'll review them, they'll rank them. It's a formal competitive public solicitation. And based on that ranking, the funding recommendations happen and they come to the council for approval as they did earlier this year.
For this award cycle, there were 2 application types, which were separated into 2 separate requests for applications. These were split up based on funding sources and the purpose of the funding. The first application type was for the Community Action Program, and I'll get into more specifics about this funding shortly. But overall, the purpose of this funding is to support anti-poverty programs that help eliminate the causes and conditions of poverty and help people reach self-sufficiency. And the second application type was for the Homeless Crisis Response System, which supports programs that provide services for people who are experiencing homelessness or who are at risk of becoming homeless. Next slide. So now let's get into the Community Action Program in a bit more detail. So these programs are funded by federal and state community services block grant or CSBG funds, as well as local human service funds. CSBG funds are distributed by federal and state governments to designated community action agencies across the nation. Clark County Community Services is the designated community action agency for all of Clark County. So we receive these funds to help alleviate the causes and conditions of poverty in our area. And currently, program eligibility allows for services to households earning up to 200% of the federal poverty level. And then the Human Service Fund comprises of local board designated general fund dollars to assist individuals and families by providing funds to address poverty in our community. As the designated community action agency, we're required to conduct an assessment of the needs of people living in poverty in our area every 3 years. And part of this requirement includes using the results of the assessment to determine which programs receive the Community Services Block Grant funding. So therefore, we use the results of the 2024 Community Needs Assessment to set the funding categories for this solicitation. And the RFA funded categories that received services were those that were, first of all, the most frequently identified needs in the Community Needs Assessment, and also for which there were no or inadequate sources of funding in the community. These included physical health, which under that category, we had dental services and food assistance, income and asset building, which included credit repair and financial planning and budgeting assistance, as well as transportation assistance. And specific funding amounts for each category were based on the proportion of community services or community needs assessment respondents who identified each category as a need. Next slide. And I think if you click one more, there should be some highlighted pieces that pop up. Oh, it just goes to the next slide. Okay, you can go back then. All right, so this figure here was pulled from the 2024 Community Needs Assessment and shows the percent of respondents who identified a need in each service category. There were supposed to be some highlights on this slide. I'm not sure what happened to them, but you'll see that the top areas are the ones that were solicited in this RFA. So at the top, we have food assistance, then dental services. Housing assistance was solicited outside of this RFA through the Homeless Crisis Response System. And then we also had asset building, physical health services, and transportation assistance. You'll also see utility assistance was identified as a high need, but this is also funded outside of this RFA through designated LIHEAP funds. And then next, I'll pass it off to Kayla to talk about the Homeless Crisis Response System funding and the categories that were solicited through that RFA.
Thank you, Abby. I'm going to pick it up here with an overview of how our homeless crisis response system is funded and where those dollars come from. We receive funding from two primary sources, the Consolidated Homelessness Grant and local document recording fees, which are also referred to as House Bill. CHG is awarded to the county by the Washington State Department of Commerce, and these funds are tied to homeless housing, the Homeless Housing and Assistance Act, and the document recording fee surcharge. One thing to note here is that Commerce directs us to prioritize maintaining existing service levels with these funds, which essentially means that we should be using CHG to keep our core crisis response system stable. Additionally, local document recording fees are generated right here in Clark County through real estate transactions, and about 75% of these funds are required by state law to support the local homeless housing plan, which Michael had talked about earlier. The remaining portion is distributed through an interlocal agreement between the county and the cities. And currently, local document recording fees are primarily used to fund shelter capacity here. So together, these are the two funding streams that help shape our response to the homeless crisis in Clark County. And we will move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So now that we've looked at how the system is funded, we're going to go over the structure. So more specifically, how Clark County governs and coordinates its homeless response. So we are an independent COC, which means we're locally governed and not part of a regional or state continuum of care structure. We still follow all federal and state regulations, but the decisions of how we structure our system and allocate our resources are made here locally. Council for the Homeless serves as the lead agency and staffs our COC steering committee. This committee acts as the governing body for our local continuum of care, and that committee includes stakeholders from across sectors. It includes service providers, people with lived experience, elected officials, and more. And it's responsible for guiding our planning, performance, and recommendations for funding across our system. And our work is guided both by the state strategic homeless housing plan and our own local homeless housing plan. These plans provide an alignment for homeless response strategies in our community with the goal of meeting local needs. One consistent theme in both of the existing plans is a focus on maintaining capacity to the extent that it's possible. And with that, I want to hand it back to Michael to walk through how this governance structure actually plays out in practice.
Thank you. Thank you. Next slide, please. So these are the requirements from the state to the localities of what needs to be in the local plan objectives. So the state legislation that created designated homeless funding also required the state to create a strategic homeless housing plan and requires localities to do their own 5-year plan, which is aligned with and follows the state strategic plan requirements. That's generally how it works. So we get periodically requirements from the state of these are the things that need to be in your plan as the objectives. You can see them above. I do want to say objective 1, that promoting an equitable, accountable, transparent homeless crisis response system. There are implicit tasks in each of these objectives. So that one, having it be accountable, having it be transparent, that means that we need to be recording metrics on all the activities that are happening. It means that we need to make those activities and the metrics publicly available. Homeless crisis response system means that we are funding a system in itself as a continuum of care. So the spectrum of services that constitute a continuum of care, which we will talk about in future slides, you will see which form the categories in our homeless crisis response system, we are required to have available in our community and fund. Strengthening the homeless provider workforce is kind of self-explanatory. There has been, honestly, a crisis in not just our community, but communities across the state with provider workforce, not only having it be difficult to hire staff that provides human services, but also retain staff. There's a lot of burnout happening. The state has noticed that. So they really want each community to be taking actionable steps to help reinforce that provider workforce. I know that the steering committee for the current local plan has been talking about that a lot and has identified it as one of the top priorities. Objective 3, in terms of providing assistance, what that means is it means that we have to have as a system a common assessment of vulnerability for the people that receive services. So you can target specific populations, find out what services are appropriate, and make sure that the people with the greatest need level are the ones that are receiving services. Objective 4, what that implies and requires by the state is that the services need to house people. It can be a spectrum of services that includes outreach, that includes shelter, but it needs to be a continuum that helps people who are unhoused end up in housing and achieve stability. As a locality, we can add objectives. Each objective has to have actionable steps, has to have strategies, has to have timelines. And I guess, again, for all of it, we have to be collecting data and measured objectives that are done. Next slide, please. We are currently, as was mentioned earlier, in the process of doing our next 5-year local plan. I just covered the objectives that we received from the state that are going through that. We've done the local data collection and environmental assessment of what's happening. We've been doing different feedback forums from community, from service providers, from steering committee. We are currently in the process of developing the action steps in the early stages of drafting the plan. And that will be coming first to the Ending Community Homelessness Organization in October, the draft to review and receive feedback on. And it's going to be coming to the County Council for approval in November. I believe the date is November 12th. But that's where we're at, the early stages of the drafting right now. The ECHO members that are in the steering committee are Councilor Young for the county, Councilor Stover for the city, Councilor Ferrer for the city of Battle Ground. Next slide, please.
Chair, can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Thanks. You had said that there's local objectives that could be added by our community. Have you seen any need for that?
So we are still in the process of developing the objectives, and that's what will rise of that is coming out of the steering committee. So I'm not aware at this point of new objectives that are emerging. Like, I think there's a very strong focus on provider workforce. There's a strong focus on maintaining bed capacity across the system for shelters, for rapid rehousing, and for PSH, with a priority on shelters. But we are in a fiscally contracting environment right now with a lot of uncertainty in terms of regulations, especially with the changes that are happening at the federal level. So I think the focus that I am seeing as I don't want to say a bystander because I'm staff, but we really, as staff, at least in the planning process, other than make sure that it meets the state requirements, we try not to intervene a lot. So what I'm seeing is really a focus on maintaining service level and local capacity as much as possible, which is going to be a challenge over the next 5 years.
Okay, thanks. Just want to check.
Sure. Absolutely. So these are the members in the steering committee. I've already mentioned the members of ECHO, but as you can see, there is a whole spectrum of representation in the local plan steering committee that includes service providers, includes people with lived experience, and includes just different stakeholders in the system. Next slide, please. And this slide, and these last three slides I presented, they're actually from ECHO Northwest, which is the consultant that was hired by Council for the Homeless to help shepherd the drafting of the formation and drafting of this plan. But this is basically some of the community engagement in steps, kind of like a different visualization of the first slide I showed you of where we are at right now and where we're going, where you can see that there have been workshops, findings are being made, drafting is happening after the workshops, and then there are going to be listening sessions following the draft. And next slide, please. And I'll pass it to Kayla.
Thank you. So we are going to switch over to the service activities that we actually fund through our homeless crisis response system. These are the core housing interventions supported under the most recent RFA that we recently presented to y'all. And the intent of this RFA, again, was not to introduce new program types. So all the programs funded under this RFA were already in operation within the county. And it was our prioritization to sustain the existing capacity to the extent that we could here, consistent with state guidance and expectations directly from Commerce. So you'll see that we fund here rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, street outreach, homeless prevention, temporary housing interventions, which include shelter and transitional housing, and then core supports, which for our community is a SOAR program. So while the services themselves may not be new, what's critical here is protecting the infrastructure that we've built, especially in a time when the need remains high, but resources are limited or uncertain. So sustaining what's working allows us to build intentionally and responsibly as new opportunities arise. And with that, I will turn it back to Abby.
Thanks, Kayla. And we can go to the next slide. So for each request for application, we put together a comprehensive guidance document, which was shared publicly for all potential applicants when the application opened. And it was also provided to the CAB to guide their review and scoring. The guidance documents included details for each RFA, information about funding categories, application instructions, program eligibility and requirements, timeline, and all questions and scoring criteria for each application. And if you want to review these in more detail, they were included with the work session materials, or you can feel free to reach out to us over email if you have any questions about these or want more details. Next slide. To provide some more context, here's the overall timeline for this request for applications. The applications opened on October 1st, 2024. Full applications were due January 3rd, 2025. The CAB reviewed applications and inputted their scores between February and April 2025, and then provided their recommendations on May 7th. And then, as you know, we came to the County Council for approval on June 3rd, and contracts started July 1st. Based on the request during the June 3rd meeting, it sounded like you were most interested in hearing about the specifics of the CAB application review, which I'll get into now. Next slide. And you can actually go to the next one too. All right, so first of all, I just want to provide an overview of the Community Action Advisory Board, or CAB. As I said earlier, Clark County Community Services is the designated community action agency in our area and receives community services block grant funds. One of the requirements of the CSBG Act is to have a standing advisory board that advocates on behalf of people who are low income to ensure that services are available and equitable. Some of the main responsibilities of the CAB include assisting, advising, and reviewing the community needs assessment process, reviewing and scoring proposals for county funding of anti-poverty programs and homeless services, evaluating the progress of CAP and HCRS programs through regular review of program outcomes, and acting as an advocate in the interest of low-income and underserved populations of Clark County. Next slide. The structure of the CAB is required by federal regulation, which is Information Memorandum 82, and this requires that the board have 1/3 elected officials, 1/3 low-income representatives, and 1/3 community members. For our board, we also ensure that each of these categories has one representative from each of the 5 county council districts to ensure equal representation from throughout the county. For the elected officials, City of Vancouver currently has a designated position on the board, which is held by Councilor Diana Perez. There is not currently a designated position for a county councilor, but this could be changed with revisions to the bylaws and county ordinance if desired. Members are recruited and appointed through open positions, which are posted through news release. Then the CAB executive team reviews applications, conducts interviews, and recommends members to appointment with help of county staff. Applications are scored based on experience, skills, commitment to equity, involvement in the community, and interest in the board. And members are officially approved to the board by approval of the county council. And new members are also required to complete a detailed orientation where they are brought up to speed with all of the funding requirements and details about the system, and also requirements of being on the board. Members serve for 3-year terms and are eligible for reappointment up to 3 times. And there's also an executive committee, which is democratically elected to the board each year. These positions are held for 1 year, and members are allowed to hold a position for up to 3 consecutive terms. Next slide. So as you know, the CAB reviews and scores applications for the Community Action Program and Homeless Crisis Response System, RFA, among other responsibilities. The questions and allocated points for these requests for applications were determined based on funding guidance and objectives. As you can see in the guidance document, all questions and scoring expectations were provided to all potential applicants and CAB members. For county staff responsibility, staff were responsible for determining application questions, points, and scoring guides based on funding requirements. We also scored objective questions and provided technical assistance to applicants and CAB members. Objective questions were those for which scoring was not subject to any personal interpretation, and would receive the same score no matter who was scoring them. For example, applicants received a certain number of points for the number of collaboration letters that they submitted. And then the CAB was responsible for reviewing and scoring all subjective questions and providing recommendations for funding to the county council based on the overall average scores for each application. And they all received an in-depth training in January about the RFA, and we walked through the scoring guidance for each question with them. Next slide. That is all we have for our presentation. Thank you all for your time, and we're happy to take any questions now.
Great, thank you very much. Are there any questions from council? I'm looking at you, Councilor Young. Go ahead.
Thank you for being here this morning. And I think this has been a helpful update. There was a few questions that I had that were actually related to the questions. My first question would be, who determined the questions for the applications? Is that by the CAB itself, or is that staff?
It's generally, sorry, excuse me. It's generally staff that, we prepared the guide. We prepared the questions. As Abby mentioned, the questions are really based on what is required to be funded, and how, our best due diligence in getting to that place and helping the application, helping both the proposers highlight the things that need to be highlighted to be able to make a determination, and helping the scorers make that assessment as well. We do, as I think you've seen, it's a very similar parallel process to what you've probably experienced in Urban County Policy Board, where staff prepares the guidelines, generally writes the questions, and there is generally open influence from the CAB, from the advisory committee, if they don't like the question, if they want it reworded in a different way, and they can give us that feedback, unless there is a reason it can't be done. Like, we will do our best to accommodate that.
Okay, thank you. So my questions and my thoughts are centered primarily around coordinated entry. And so for just, let me kind of give an example here on page 15, when we're talking about, we're talking about temporary housing interventions, so shelter space, for example. The shelters, and correct me if I'm wrong, the shelters, when they're a program of community services, so through the block grant or wherever that source of funding is, their placements are all through coordinated entry. Is that accurate?
Yes. Yes. Coordinated entry has to be involved. So by state regulations, someone can be placed immediately into shelter, but within 48 hours, that connection of the person that's been placed in shelter needs to have gone through coordinated entry, and that assessment needs to have taken place. Broadly speaking, as a system, including shelter, we are required to have vulnerability-based services, and that requires coordinated entry involvement.
Okay, so somebody can be placed into temporary shelter with?
Circumstantially, you can go ahead.
So coordinated entry is, I think, a kind of an all-encompassing approach to entering somebody into the system. And so our lead entity, Council for the Homeless, sets the process for coordinated entry, and also is the lead of our COC. And so an example would be with victim service providers, so the YWCA, or with youth service providers who wouldn't appropriately be able to call a housing line, right, and give their personal information. Coordinated entry allows us to create different access points for those service providers as well. So the YWCA, Janus Youth, for some of their shelter programs specifically, go through their own internal intake processes and can bring people in. And then they just make sure they follow the processes that are set by Council for the Homeless for that communication and tracking on the data side of things. So there are other access points.
Okay, all right. So that is helpful and good to know. thank you. But one of my questions, and maybe these questions should be tailored a little bit differently depending on that exact bit of information. So, for example, and I'm pretty sure no shelter space has control over permanent housing placement. That is through coordinated entry.
The shelters have the opportunity to move people into housing and connect them with other programs. So if somebody's in shelter and they identify a permanent housing solution, say it's like an affordable rental unit, the shelter has a budget of availability to allow them to do the moving costs, do the deposit costs, and pay first and last month's rent, but they can't provide an ongoing subsidy. So if they identify a client will be self-sufficient, they could exit them via that strategy. Or if they identify a client would be better suited in like more of a transitional housing program, not transitional housing, but rapid rehousing, where a subsidy is occurring for, in between 3-6 months, depending on their level of need. They can transfer them, have a partnership with a rapid rehousing program through coordinated entry or through their own collaborations, agency to agency. Or if there's someone with high needs, they can identify them and flag them for a permanent supportive housing placement outside of shelter.
Okay.
And having said that, I think your point is valid. The shelters have limited control over people exiting shelter into housing. And all our system is required, by state, by the state to be to triage based on vulnerability. So our rapid rehousing, our PSH, they're going to take the most vulnerable out of the system, whether they're in shelter or not. Now, rapid rehousing and PSH are also required by us for 1 out of every 4 minimum entries have to be coming from the shelter system. So our shelters are required in our contracts to be, communicating and coordinating with coordinated entry so that their most vulnerable clients that are in shelter are being identified and considered. So they move, they are part of that process of moving out. So it's an imperfect system,
yeah,
but
yeah.
it's what we are required to do.
Yes. So, and one of the things that I would be interested in is if we could tailor these questions a little bit differently, and maybe different questions for different organizations based on how they move people in and out of their system. Because if it's all through coordinated care and they don't have any control over who comes in and who leaves into, permanent housing, how do we penalize them for some of the outcomes that they're unable to control? So I think that would be important. And I, also with, the rapid rehousing as well, number of unsheltered entries, percent of chronic move-ins, percent of chronic housing, they don't really have any control over that. So I think it's important to kind of collect that data, but I don't know how much weight I would place on that in judgment of whether they would be an effective provider for those services.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, just some thoughts. And then, just coordinated entry in general, like, I mean, this problem is enormous and incredibly complex, but, you can kind of get down into the weeds and look at every single little policy and how you're doing things. But really, just in general, I feel like the biggest problem in our system is that all of these people are individuals and every one of them has their own path, towards good health and housing and all of that. And we have a large institution that's providing it. And so that personal connection, I think, is really the key to this. And this centers around coordinated entry too. I think we really need to look at, look from first point of contact all the way through the end of the system and review where do we need to make course corrections. So for example, a case or not caseworker, but an outreach worker makes contact with somebody. Maybe they've been in the system for a while. Maybe they're brand new. Where are they at? You know, because there are points in time where individuals are ready for services, and there's that narrow window of opportunity. And you know, I'd like for us to look into seeing how we can give our, you know, the people that are boots on the ground that meet with these people, that know where they're at, give them a little bit more ability to capture somebody when they know this is their time. Or you never know for sure, right? But if there's things that are indicating this is the right time for that person, maybe they aren't the highest level of barrier, but they're ready, and this is the time for them. And if we don't seize that window of opportunity, we might lose them, and they may have additional barriers in the future. So it's incredibly challenging trying to address a problem that is very particular to the individual itself with a large institution. And there's no perfect way there, but I do think that we really need to try to see how we can connect to these people better, and how the people that do make that connection can have a little bit more control and ability to help them navigate the system in its entirety. So just some comments and thoughts. I really appreciate the work that you all do, and I appreciate and respect the massiveness of and the extent of the struggles that we have in this system. Thank you.
Here.
Good morning, counselors. I'm Vanessa Gaston, Director for Clark County Community Services. Am I on? Okay.
You are.
So Counselor Young, you make a very good point. And it's one of the reasons where we need to be careful about what objectives you put in the Homeless Action Plan. Because whatever we put in the Homeless Action Plan has to be collected, measured based on the state requirements. And the state requirements require higher vulnerability. You can't get around that. And that's one of the reasons why coordinated entry was created by the HARF Act, because before that, we had people all over the place helping homeless. And that was hard to track, and people were kind of creaming the crop, whatever the better word to say. And they wanted the more harder to serve to get some services. This is why we actually have other types of funding that support the homeless action services, such as a lot of our behavioral dollars. We do a lot in the mental health system to help the unhoused, but they may not necessarily be a clear objective in the Homeless Action Plan. Otherwise, we got to follow that vulnerability and that. And so we might have people who are ready, who are in treatment, but because they've been in treatment for a while, they are unhoused. But if you went and got an assessment, they would not be necessarily high vulnerable because they've been in. So we are able to use other resources to try to meet those needs. And we have been trying to do that, is leverage those dollars the best we can. But we can't change how the Homeless Action Plan operates, because that is the goal, is they want the most hardest to serve on the street to be served first with those intensive dollars. But there are ways that you can serve these other populations, but coordinated entry has a role to make sure that that happens. Now, King County got in trouble because they did that. They actually tried to serve the ones who were the most ready, the one is the hardest to serve, and they actually got dinged in an audit because they were told, you are not following the vulnerability assessment. And we do not want to have to be putting no kind of corrective actions for how we are running our homeless action plans down here.
I thank you for that. I definitely agree. I think that we always need to, in your point with different sources of funding is, I think, a critical point of this. And so, you know, we follow what we have to with, you know, the parameters that we're giving on certain funds, whatever we have that's local, and that becomes kind of an important point when we talk about, you know, 1590 funds potentially in the future. You know, the more local, the better, more control we have, and we can look at those gaps that we're seeing that are driven by the institutionalization of the system itself, and focus on it. So I appreciate it. And there's no perfect way forward, and just it's tough.
Yeah.
Every person is
I do want to reassure you that a lot of what you just expressed, though, you know, it is a recognized and shared sentiment, not just with staff, but with service providers, including coordinated entry. And there is, I can't tell you, countless conversations that happen continuously about how do we do it better? Where are the compromises that can be made so that, federal state requirements of what coordinated entry is are met and they're respected, and the assessments that are happening are centered on the person that needs the services, and the that person can access the services they need as quickly as possible when they need them and when they're ready. So, it truly is an imperfect system. On a personal level, I can tell you that when I have looked at systems that use coordinated entry and systems that do not, I'm not seeing a performance advantage on the systems that don't. And what coordinated entry does allow communities to do is they allow us to target subpopulations, prioritize services, prioritize vulnerabilities, prioritize gaps in ways that communities that don't have that in place really will struggle to.
I'd also like to just jump in and add as well. Coordinated entry as it exists here in Clark County is really in its infancy as a structure, right, that we have to follow. And we know and have, taken that feedback that we've gotten from agencies. But the thing that we're now moving into, and, my action, my advice to the providers that we fund in our system is around if you're noticing those bottlenecks, right? Because I can't speak to the entire access and accessing programs like what you're saying in outreach if someone's homeless and if they're ready, because the fact is that we don't have the resources to meet the entire community's needs, and program spots, especially ongoing program spots, are very sought after. And even, not program spots, but things like vouchers, right? Those wait lists are incredibly long. And so we don't have the resources here to meet everyone when they're ready all the time. But what we can do as a system is when people access, we can do what you've described. We can assess when they come in. We can assess their impact if they bounced around to programs, and we can promote successful exits to the best of our capabilities. And so that move-in that we're now asking of agencies is with the programs, with the participants that you're getting through coordinated entry, what are we seeing? Are there bottlenecks? Are there some people being placed into programs and maybe they're not appropriate? And then how do our coordinated entry processes need to change or adapt to allow some flexibility in, a reprioritization or maybe a prioritization for other community members who, right, aren't hitting those vulnerability scores as high? Maybe we do need to reflect and adapt. So I absolutely share your sentiment, and I just want you to know that that work is being done to identify what's happening and look through our processes to see where we can adjust them.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Appreciate that. And then the last comment that I would make is I would love to see a county counselor placed onto the CAB, and not so much that we can direct the conversation, but I think the conversation that takes place in that board, I think it would be very helpful for one of us to have that experience and bring it to the decision making at the council level.
Can I add to that?
Yes.
Yeah, I was thinking about that as well. I was trying to think about the composition of the CAB and whether there's representation for the unincorporated areas. And I see it's 15 members, 1/3, so 5 members, elected officials, 5 low-income representatives, and 5 community members. It says each category has 1 representative from each district. Does that imply county councilor districts? Okay.
Correct.
So I get that the goal is to get it geographically spread out, but I just wonder if in practice, if a majority or all of the members are actually from urban areas versus unincorporated in practice. And if so, I'm wondering if there'd be a way that we could include some kind of requirement that a certain percent are from unincorporated areas. Do you know how it works out in practice?
I apologize. I don't have the data in writing in front. I actually think we do fairly well with it. We can look more if and get that information for you and get it to you. We'd be happy to. Just off my head, I think there's pretty good representation from both urban and non-urban areas on the CAB. And I would say in terms of counselor representation on CAB, we would welcome that. I think we always, in any of our advisory boards, really, truly welcome that. We need your direction so that we can, to do so that we could make changes to both bylaws and ordinance and bring it to you so you can pass it. And I think the limitation to that so far has just been your own assessment of availability for it, but always open and welcome to it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I could see in elected officials that it would probably be all city officials or urban officials if the county wasn't represented, but the other categories could include unincorporated community members and representatives of low income.
The elected officials are not only city electeds. It has to be a public election. So there are school board members.
Oh, good.
There are, there's utility members that are elected.
Okay.
So it's pretty broad.
I guess I'd just be interested in looking at that a little bit more and seeing what the next step might be in line with what Councilor Young is talking
Yeah,
about.
the other thing I would add too is that if we did add a seat for county councilor, then, the district that we represent might be something that we factor in when we determine who would serve on the board.
Okay. Any other questions? Counselor Belcott, did you have anything?
No, Chair, I was on the ECHO board for a year and a half, so I'm very familiar with how the CAB works and how ECHO works. So no.
Great, thank you. I have maybe just a couple of comments. I worked for a couple of different community action agencies in the early 80s, Clackamas and Multnomah County. And it was a similar time in the early 80s of expanding need and contracting resources. And one of the things that I participated in and was emphasized is really encouraging some advocacy, because access to the federal programs, especially the food stamp program at that time, and family assistance, it was very difficult for people to access those programs. So I don't know the status at this point, but encouraging people to be able to access those programs, I think it's going to get more difficult as we go down the road. And so thank you. I can appreciate the difficult environment that you're working in. I served on ECHO for a little over a year, I think. And I know one of the issues that came up related to severe weather, and I'm going to tie this to the service providers, because I think I agree with you. Support and recruiting more service providers is really important. But one of the needs that was identified is for volunteers for those warming shelters or cooling shelters. And we had a couple of us met with the Extension Service, because they often do training and have this great volunteer network. So there was interest there, but I don't think there was any follow-up. So I would just suggest we're not going to be replacing service providers with volunteers, but it could be something that could augment the system as a whole.
So Chair Marshall, I just want
Yes.
to quickly respond to that. So based on some feedback we heard from ECHO, but also from the counselors, we have taken some of our dollars, general fund, and some other pots and dollars, and we're going to put out a request for applications for severe weather and to see who's interested in actually trying to do that, to get some dollars. So whether they want to train volunteers, they want to set up cooling shelters and things like that. So we can kind of augment the homeless system, because the homeless system is stretched. So we really need to actually do something in addition to kind of what the homeless providers are doing during these severe weather situations. So
Actually, one of my to-do lists today is Jordan, have a conversation with him, because for the scoring committee of that request for applications, it's going to be a formal public solicitation, as we do, competitive. And we want half the scoring committee. It just, this has to be very fast turnaround because severe weather. The season starts in November and we are in August right now, and we've been working on this. But have a scoring committee that has CAB membership and ECHO membership. So I'm going to be talking to him today about trying to get, 3 individuals from the ECHO to serve on the scoring committee for this severe weather RFA that we'll be putting out shortly.
That sounds great because it became just a standing agenda item. And I think we came to better understand CRESA and their definitions and those things. But it would be great to have that someone needed to step up to provide some leadership. So it sounds like this will be able to provide that. So
The
thank you.
conversations that happen at the council level and at ECHO, like we do listen to, and if opportunities present themselves to take action that reflects those priorities, we try to incorporate them. So that's what we're doing here.
Great. I know that you listen. Thank you. Let's see, I'm just looking. Oh, the other thing that I made a note of here is the comprehensive plan that we're in the midst of. We have Jose and Oliver right in the audience here. And just looking at the housing element now and the directives that the cities and the county have and all those income bands that goes all the way down to shelter. And I look at that and I wonder, wow, how are we going to do that? But I think there's opportunities to try and figure that out. And I know representing a more rural district, and I get you need to have efficiencies and centralizing some services, but in as much as there could be some decentralized services, because I know every community has homeless families and they're not as visible. But every community has homeless. So I'll just toss that out there as a thought. And if there's a way to collaborate, maybe you already are collaborating, but I think there's opportunities now that we're in the comp plan process. Okay, I think that may do it from us. Thank you very much for your work and for this presentation. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Council.
And if I could just clarify, did we have 3 counselors that wanted to follow up with the bylaws and
Yes,
ordinance?
yes. Thank
Okay.
you for bringing that up. I think
you.
that would be a good, you have 4.
We will start working on that.
Thanks. Great.